I remember standing in long, long lines with my mother and waiting just to get food.
Roy Dennis grew up in New York City during the Great Depression. He didn't read about it in a history book. He lived it.
He would make a good potato pancake, and that's what we had to eat for the whole day.
He believed it's all coming back, and he saw firsthand what happens to people when the food runs out.
I think people would revert to their lower basic instincts of survival, and it's not a place you want to be, believe me. My name is Roy Dennis. I was born in Brooklyn, New York in the middle of the 30s, in the Depression years. Around 1930s, my mom and dad got married and moved to New York City in search of work. They had heard that there was jobs were more plentiful there, but that was maybe when they first heard it, and by the time they get down there was no work. At that time, the Depression started in 1929, mainly from the collapse of Wall Street at that time, and they didn't have any things in place to stop the flow of the money going out, the stocks dropping. Banks started shutting down for runs on the banks. People were taking out all their money, and so they had to declare bank holidays. My uncle and aunt had also moved down, and the four of them took an apartment together, a 1,200 square foot apartment in a building of 12 families. My cousins, two of them, Richard and Barbara and myself, were the young ones in the family, and we suffered a little bit in the Depression for lack of food. Food was scarce. The four adults weren't working. My mom found a job working in a hot dog stand, and she was able to bring some of the buns home, and once in a while some of the hot dogs. But my uncle did menial labor now and then, and he was able to bring home some food. Things were very bad. I can remember my uncle getting some of the older potatoes from the Mark guy downstairs who we got to know, and bringing them up and making a potato pancake for us. And we were lucky to get an onion in it, ground up, but he would make a good potato pancake. And us cousins would sit on a towel on the center of the living room floor. We didn't have much furniture, and that's what we had to eat for the whole day. My great-grandmother I saw one time, and she had a farm up in the northern parts of Vermont, and she had 5,000 turkeys. It was a large farm. And what I remember about that was running from those turkeys. They were chasing me, and my grandmother was rocking on the porch, and I jumped in her arms and stayed there because I was running from those turkeys. And that's the only thing I remember about her. But we ate very well while we were there because she had a big garden. During that time, my mom and dad, I used to listen to them talking and hearing their concerns about, making a living, of course. Being a youngster, I didn't really know the dire condition we were in, but I knew things were bad because I saw a lot of people on the streets. I had heard this commotion out in the hallway one time, and it was winter. This family was being evicted out of the building. They had 2 children, and we used to play with the kids, and they were the same age. And I went downstairs with my cousin, and here was all their furniture out on the sidewalk, right on the edge of the street, not on the street, but right on the curb where people could still walk by. And the 2 kids were sitting up on top of one of the dressers, and it was snowing. My mom came down, and I said, "Mom, what's going on?" And she said, "Well, they couldn't pay the rent. They got evicted." The Great Depression lasted probably from 1929 and the crash, and then through the early parts of the 40s. It really didn't start to get any better until probably 1942. The government was gearing up for the war. There was a move on to encourage people because things had gotten so bad that people were taking their lives, some of them. A lot of people were on welfare. I remember standing in long, long lines with my mother and waiting just to get food, especially during the beginning of the war. They had long lines for different things that were war rationed. There were soup lines in New York I knew of, and bread lines. They fed a lot of people that way, and a lot of them weren't homeless. They were just didn't have enough money to buy food, and that's how they would get by, to supplement what little money they did have for food. The wartime that was right at the end of the Depression, I remember vividly. One of the things that I had was these war ration books, and these are both my name here, but I'll just read you what it says on here. And by the way, these books have on them ration coupons, and one of them has on each coupon has an aircraft carrier. This one has a tank, and then one here has an airplane right here. And you had to give so many stamps for so much food. It says here, warning, this book is the property of the United States government. It is unlawful to sell it to any other person or to use it or permit anyone else to use it, except to obtain ration goods in accordance with regulations of the Office of Price Administration. This book is for your government's assurance of your right to buy your fair share of certain goods made scarce by war. I don't believe this is over. I believe that in the future, I believe we'll go back to rationing of some kind. And at that time, I would want to be living in the country with fruit trees and a garden and have my food and water sure. So there was a black market going on at the time in New York City, because I remember people I knew that were getting things like on the black market, meat was rationed, and people were getting big bags of meat for $10. They had to pay $10 for maybe a bag of meat that was probably worth $2 before the war, and they would just slip the butcher the money. But that was going against, the government, and the government could have closed that guy down had they caught him. Things like that were happening.
What Roy's describing here, not being able to count on the system to feed your family, that's exactly why so many folks today are working on getting more prepared. Backup power, their own water source, growing more of their own food. And no matter where you're starting from, whether you're in town right now or already on land, there's a lot you can learn from folks who've already built it. And that's why we put together the Exodus series. It's free, just 6 families, 1 per day for a whole week, sent straight to your inbox. And you'll see what they built, power, water, food, the whole thing, and how they pulled it together. Just go to thereadylife.com/yourexodus and start the journey today. All right, back to Roy.
My brother still lived in New York, and he told me when the power went out, early 60s, he had to walk across the Brooklyn Bridge from Manhattan where he worked, and everybody was helping everybody. They were using flashlights, and people were giving people candles and things like that, because people had to walk out of Manhattan across the different bridges into New Jersey and the different boroughs, where they lived. 7 or 8 years later, and I think it was early 70s, it happened again. And my brother said everything was totally different. Women were getting raped, men were getting mugged, people were selling flashlights for $20, little dollar flashlights. The whole mindset of the people had changed in that short, I think it was 7 or 8 year period. So it shows you how the breakdown in cities can happen very quickly, especially in the larger cities, because the supply of food, I think, would only last 2 weeks at the very outside. And then people will turn into a different breed of animal. They will, to protect their families or feed their families, people will do crazy things. And without God, I think people will have a lot worse time than they would if they had God in their lives. Contrasting between the country and the city, the country people have their gardens, they have their animals, they have a means of feeding themselves at very, very little cost, because all it's the cost of their the water, if they have to pay for water, and the seed. Although some people can get the seeds out of their previous crops, the only thing they would have to pay for then is their shelter, if it wasn't paid for already, and maybe their mode of transportation, gasoline and so forth, doctor care maybe. But in the city, you not only have to pay for your rent, or if you were fortunate enough to own a home, you'd have to pay high taxes in the cities, but you also have to pay for food. And the prices of food are now, they're in New York City, they're very, very dear. The price of housing has just skyrocketed in New York. My family, brother and his wife and their children live there, and just to buy a place in New York is way out of reach for even upper middle class. You have to be very wealthy to buy a home there, a regular house in the city's limits. And I think when the time comes, like it did in the Depression, people had to pay for not only their shelter, their apartments, and maybe not having a car. We never had a car, but we still had to pay for the subway or the trolley cars or taxi cabs if we had to be rushed to a hospital or something, they also had to pay for the food. And this is probably why we didn't eat so well at that time, because we just had enough maybe to pay for the rent and the transportation to look for work. And don't forget the utilities and so forth. So that's probably why our family had a harder time getting food in New York City than we would have had we lived in a country location. Well, I think the availability of food in the country was more of a fact. That's where the food comes from. A lot of people in the country have kitchen gardens. Some have large gardens. Some at that time were making their living from farming, so they did bartering and things like that. So they were able, maybe through their neighbors, to have a good amount of food on their table. In the cities, we were encouraged, those that had pieces of land, which we didn't, be living in an apartment house and we didn't own anything. Those that had small pieces of land were encouraged to grow what they called victory gardens during the war. And that was small gardens, and I believe the government gave them the seed to start out their gardens, and maybe a booklet on how to start, because a lot of people didn't know how to grow things like today. A lot of our folks don't know how to grow vegetables and different things that come from the garden. I think the country, like I said, had more food because of availability. The city had food. It had to, of course, all be trucked into the stores. At that time, they didn't have big supermarkets like they have today. They had small mom-and-pop stores. And sometimes these stores ran out pretty quickly. And a thing that I read about in 1973, this was in the Depression years, we had an oil embargo in the United States. And gasoline was short. It was not rationed, but it was very short, especially in the large cities. I remember in Los Angeles, where I was at that time, waiting in long lines. And anytime people saw a gas station that was open, and most of them were closed, we didn't know if we would have gas tomorrow. I remember reading in the paper down there about a little town in Colorado, way off in the boondocks, in a valley somewhere, that hadn't got a gas truck in there a food truck in there for 2 weeks, I think it was. It said in the paper. And by the time the food truck pulled in and the guy got out and opened the back of the food truck, everybody in the town ran over and ransacked the truck. It was like a lawless act. They just took everything they wanted. The guy didn't know what to do. He was just driving the truck, but he could have lost his life if he resisted those people, But I don't think those people were that hungry. I think that it was for fear of wanting of food that they acted like they did. And I think we could see that happen again, soon maybe. So it's something that we really need to look into, maybe start reading our Bibles again, and especially in the chapter on Matthew 24, it talks a lot about the end days and of course Revelation. But these are the things that we need to start getting closer to God and learning what He has in store for us as His followers.
Roy lived through something most of us have only read about, and the reason we wanted to share his story is because the warning he left us isn't theoretical. The systems we depend on every day for food, water, power, they're not as solid as people think. And building a real backup layer by layer takes time. You don't do it in a weekend. That's why we put together the Exodus series. It's a free week-long video journey, one family per day, delivered to your inbox. 6 families who built their own power, their own water, their own food, or various systems like this. Different setups and different starting points. One of them is a former US congressman who saw all of this coming long ago. You can go to thereadylife.com/yourexodus and start the journey today. It costs nothing, and after hearing Roy out, it's the right next step. So just go to thereadylife.com/yourexodus.